Great. So this next session, we're going to hear some reports back from the breakout groups. If you could, those who are gathered around the back, if you could please take your seats and we can try and move quickly through this. Before we do that, we thought that maybe it would be useful to give a step back a little bit and kind of talk about how we got to where we currently are right now, because there does seem to be, we assume that everybody knows how we got where we are, but maybe not everybody does. So just as a reminder, we had a meeting in March where we brought together many of the cohort leaders that are here, but then we learned of some other cohorts and invited them to join as well. After that, we had there was a presentation to the Heroes group that described what had happened in March. There was enthusiasm and the thought that maybe some seed money to kind of get this started would be a useful thing. And the seed money primarily went to having a second meeting, as well as organizing these teams and kind of getting them stood up. And so we kind of called up people that we thought might be willing to lead some of these teams and sort of strong-armed them and talk them into doing that kind of work. And you see their names listed there, so I'm hoping I'll remember everybody, but for Team A, it was Thomas Keene and Philip Awadawala. For Team B, it was Haukunerson, Adam Butterworth, and Gadi Rennert. And for Team C, it was Laura Rodriguez and Gunpegi, whose last name I've forgotten. Knudsen, thank you. So those were the three teams that we didn't get them really going until about July, August-ish, and then asked to have a meeting in November where we brought just the team leads together with Peter Goodhand, Jeff, myself, and Teji Rockroburus, and we identified that things were moving along. There were some good ideas, and it would be a neat thing if we could come up with some scientific deliverables in addition to the work that the teams were doing. So we agreed that we would issue a request for ideas, which is, we just made up the term RFI, and that was sort of written over the holidays and released in mid-January. It should have gone to all of you, and if it didn't reach you, our sincere apologies, but I think the main thing to keep in mind is this is not a one and done effort. This was just kind of the first time we had done this, and we would hope that this kind of process would be something we would use kind of iteratively as the program goes forward, and we'd love to have your input on how we can make the process better. But that was how we sort of did it this first time. So we issued that, and John's going to talk about this a little bit. We issued that in mid-January. It was due in mid-February. We did a review in mid-March, and then basically let people know that we would like them to present it at this meeting, and here we are. So that's kind of the how we got to be here. What am I forgetting, Jeff? No? Oh, okay, great. So we wanted to ask John Connolly, who kindly sort of led the whole review process, if he would just kind of walk us through what was requested. For those of you who didn't see it, what was requested in that request, kind of what the criteria were and how the review worked. So was I going to do that, John, or you're going to do that? You thought I was going to do that. I shall. Okay, so if I go next. So it should be this, I think. Yes, so many people wondered what the heck was the RFI? And it was a request for ideas. I know I can get this big if I am steady-handed enough. Come on, there we go. It was a request for ideas. As I said, it was issued on the 15th of January, due the 11th of February. And really, as these things often happen now, I should note, when the welcome says it's due the 11th of February, it is due the 11th of February. But we did allow some elasticity in that for people who said, we got this really cool idea, but we can't quite make it by then. So, that kind of dribbled on maybe another week or two. But then John organized a review that he'll tell you about, and that was carried out on the 8th of March. Really, the goal of the RFI, as stated in the document, was to identify a core set of pilot projects that would advance our scientific agenda for research among lots and lots of cohorts. And it was said there that priority would be given to projects that demonstrated innovative uses of existing cohort resources, a broad scope across multiple cohorts, quick wins across a relatively finite time scale, like 3 years or less. And then we're hoping that this will gain the interest of funders, and we can have another or many other requests for ideas for projects, that might take a longer time frame, and that would follow later. We wanted something that would be likely to elicit enthusiasm among prospective funders, and that we, of course, wanted the proposed research team to have the necessary expertise and resources, and opportunities for career developments for junior researchers was also felt to be, a positive thing that we wanted to encourage. So those were sort of the priority criteria. The structure of the submissions, they were short, so there was just a brief summary of the idea, then a structured abstract that described, what the idea was, a little of the background, some of the impact it could have, something about the timeline and the funding, and then any additional information that people wanted to include. And then there was a review of the submissions that was basically along, kind of standard criteria for scientific proposals. So what would be the impact, the significance, the strength of the investigators proposing it, what innovation and what approach. And I think that's all. Oh, and then the list of reviewers really was the 3 or 4 of us who were kind of leading this effort, which is Jeff Ginsburg, myself, and Peter Goodhand, and then the heads of the teams. And I should mention, sorry, we also have an executive group that includes Zhengming Chen, Nori Hirakato, now Paul Elliott, and I think that's the group, and then the heads of the teams. So that was the kind of the purpose, the structure, and the process. Any questions on that? Okay. If not, John, if you want to come up and just describe the results then of that. I'm not sure if I need to get out of this, or you will know, Ida. Okay. Yeah, you should do it.
Okay, so I'll just start. So basically, I think Terry summed up the process very well there. I'll just reiterate. I know there were some concerns about transparency and looking for more transparency. So we thought it would be a good idea just to show you what took us to this process. In terms of selecting the RFIs, these were not intended to be the IHCC RFIs forever going forward. It was really just to select RFIs for this meeting around which we would coalesce and discuss and then take forward again subsequently down the road. So as Jeff said at the interval there, if you didn't submit an RFI, you didn't miss the boat, you just missed the first boat, and there will be many more boats. And so let me just, I don't know if you can see the scores here, but basically our intention was just to replicate the NIH peer review system. So everybody that submitted an RFI, there were 23, we put them together in about 2 weeks. It took us to write the RFIs. We put it together quickly. They were sent to the reviewers. Each reviewer each RFI was assigned a primary and 2 secondary reviewers. If you were a submitter, you were obviously not responsible for reviewing your own proposal. Okay. Okay, I've been told to zoom in. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Got stubby fingers. Okay, so anyway, so basically each RFI received a primary reviewer and 2 secondary reviewers. You could not review, obviously, your own proposal or any proposal in which you were even peripherally involved. We had 13 reviewers total, so everybody got 5 or 6 proposals to review. And then you scored them on a scale from 1 to 9. This is the typical NIH review process, 1 being outstanding/exceptional, 9 being below substandard, essentially. So the primary reviewer, the second, and each secondary reviewer gave scores from 1 to 9 on each of 4 criteria, which were significance, innovation, approach, and I think the one that you can't see there, impact. Those scores, we get a mean of those scores, and then each RFI was ranked in accordance to their mean score. As well as the 3 reviewers, we had a call post-primary secondary review where the other 10 members, so 13 members of the review committee, had the opportunity to discuss further whether they agreed or did not agree with the scores. So there was some latter day moving up or down of the rankings. And that's kind of what took us to where we are now. Again, that's all to stress that these are really, the purpose of this was to select RFIs for this meeting, to which we would all contribute and drive forward and vote up or down again within the context of our breakout sessions. So again, you did not miss the boat. If you did not submit an RFI, you just missed the first boat. Is there any questions? Yes. Sure.
Beatrice Lucaroni, European Commission. Just for my curiosity, how many RFIs in total did you receive? Second question, if, as you say, somebody missed the boat, or even if somebody was not highlighted as meritant, in that case, can they reapply sometimes? Thank you.
So there were 23 proposals submitted in total. The deadline was short. We did end up extending it a week to try and get more proposals in. The turnaround time from the submission to the review was only 1 week, so we really didn't give ourselves much time either. And that was just, unfortunately, the way things broke out. I mean, Jeff could probably speak to this better in terms of follow-up submissions.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think, first of all of the RFIs were included in the meeting booklet, and I think I stated, but perhaps not as clearly, that everything was up for grabs for the, for consideration in the breakouts. And I think we encouraged that we make sausage, in a sense. In other words, that if we could select some of the best ideas, not necessarily from several different RFIs, to come up with a cogent proposal, that would be fair game. So the ones that weren't presented, that weren't selected for a presentation, would still be available for consideration. And in terms of this future aspirations, I think when we go to the Heroes meeting, we're going to forecast the fact that we're not done. This is just the first opportunity to test the waters of how this consortium will work together scientifically. We fully expect, with new members and new ideas and some time getting comfortable with one another and the consortium itself, that we're going to have multiple RFIs, or whatever we end up calling them, over time. Particularly as we learn more about what the funding opportunities are, not just from the Heroes organization, which you're going to hear about in a second, but also from some of the other potential funders around the globe, including industry. So this is just the very beginning, not to be exclusive at all.
Any other questions? Yep.
I just wanted a question which perhaps has been addressed and I don't know. Is there a charter that we have agreed? In other consortia, it's usually very democratic. And together we decide a charter, we have different committees or not, whatever it is. Having said that, I've just been in other consortia, and I think many of the cohorts have been in consortia before, and the processes may be different. But is it just that it's just a loose gathering of us together, or is it a more formal?
So I think it's currently loose and needing to be tighter. Okay, and I think the point you raised is a good one about having a charter and having agreement on principles and that sort of thing. We didn't even know, and we still don't, if we're going to have the resources to be able to have a consortium. But we think and hope so, and so I would hope that would be sort of the next thing we did. Jeff, do you want to comment?
I think that's an absolutely fantastic point, and I think you'll hear actually in the report out from Team C, the prioritization of the principles of the IHCC, which I think is embedded in what you're saying, is that we really need to have a common understanding of what we're about. We've been kind of doing this a little bit on the fly because we got the opportunity to do so. But I think as we formalize ourselves and feel like we're on firmer financial footing, we absolutely need to have a charter and a mission and a structure, and a much more clear governance structure.
Yep.
This is currently run by you and a small number of central people who then selected other people they knew and who then decided which were or were not good enough. Is there an attempt later? Do you want to carry on with that structure, or do you want to have something democratic where the cohorts decide who decides rather than a central group? who were self-selected.
I mean, can think in the immediate term for those specific RFIs, it was a very time-sensitive thing,
I
and that
understand
was the
the
most efficient way
practicality.
to do it. But I think going forward,
Yeah,
Terry,
no, absolutely. We would, you know, we really were just trying to put something together to bring forward to see if there was any there. And it seems like and it seems like there is, you know, a fair amount of interest and willingness to participate in this. And so we'd like to go forward with that kind of a model, if you all are in agreement that that's what we should do. Is there anybody who doesn't feel that that's what we should do?
I think it's terribly important to, both with regard to how it's governed, but also with regard to the types of projects that go forward. If they're very sectional, I mean, this is currently dominated, I understand why, by genetics. To those of us who are epidemiologists, epidemiology and indeed cohort studies have almost vanished. This is largely at the moment a list of genetically driven studies, many of which don't actually need cohorts at all. They just need a lot of samples and a disease. And that's suspended, you know, I'm not against such science, I think it's splendid. But I suspect if it goes on as it is, the epidemiologists may drift off because this is really about some people with a genetic focus who would like to do really smart genetics. I think smart genetics is great, but it isn't the only thing.
yeah, and I think that came across loud and clear in the Team B session. So we'll be circulating the minutes from that and the notes from that to you all for further comment on that as well.
We won't make John answer all these questions.
Okay.
No, you can answer some of them. So, Mike?
I found the RFI process really enlightening because I think sometimes it's hard for a consortium to come together totally in the abstract with a charter, and it's really diving into potential real world problems that we can kind of work together. And I think the next phase would be figuring out how to create some of these exemplars, understand what potential funding mechanisms there might be, and that allows the cohort to, I think, really gain traction and generates that not only to the outside world but to us that we can work together and there's value added. And I think it's harder to do that without examples.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And I guess in terms of people who would like to participate, I mean, you know, one of the reasons, at least, you know, that I call on my friends is that I can sort of, don't you want to do this, and please, you know, donate your time and volunteer and that sort of thing. And that's why I don't have very many friends. But I think if people are interested in participating, we would love to know that and to, you know, engage you. And you know, I hate to say it, but probably the best way to do that is to shoot an email to us and let us know. And the person to let know would be Teji Ruck-Raburis. So you should have been getting lots of emails from Teji. Does anybody not have emails from Teji? No? Yeah. Right. So maybe you could send a note out to everyone here so that you have her email and say, if you would like to volunteer to participate and to lead part of this process, we would love to have you. And just, you know, give us your name and we'll go from there. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, Terry, I was going to say there are a couple of things. One, we wanted the broadest possible array of responses to the RFI. So we got the 24. We would have happily looked at more from more diverse groups. So if we didn't reach you in that, send in your ideas. And it may have been that it seemed like a lot of work to just generate for this meeting. But we wanted that breadth of ideas. But the other one, I think the other important thing about the epidemiology versus the genetics, genomics is we have had that lens from our inception that this was about anticipating genetics, genomics coming into cohort work, and how could we organize to make that efficient and make it meaningful to existing cohorts and cohorts that were being designed with genetics, genomics in them from the beginning, like all of us. So it was a place of emphasis to how do we get the best of traditional cohorts and forward locking in towards genetics, genomics. So that was a focus area for us.
So I just had a little idea. Because we don't have any looming deadline, would it be worth repeating this process and inviting people to submit ideas, you know, in May or something, and getting John to do the review again? I mean, is that something that people would be interested in?
Can I suggest we, in the first place, because, you know, there's some confusion, as you can see, of everybody understanding exactly what the So perhaps we could have some nominations first for a group to get together to write the charter, which would make it clear it's just about getting the context. I do know you've had talks where this has been set out, but I can see, speaking to various people, not everybody, all of us have some misunderstandings perhaps. So perhaps we could, as a first thing that we do, have a nomination form sent out where people could nominate, and and it would be nice if across the globe people would nominate people to be in a group where we work together to have a charter which we circulate and reiterate. That kind of makes it much more, and I agree that having this was a very good process, because now it's brought our minds together, it's clarified things, it's made it easier to kind of know what is lacking and what has worked very well. So perhaps we should have a charter before we have more RFIs.
Okay, no, that would be great. So is there any disagreement? Rory?
I mean, I agree. I think getting people to do things is a good way of getting them to say it should have been done differently. And you've been fantastically successful in achieving that. But I think the discussion that we've had has been really good, in that the one we had around in Group B, around what is the strategy and what can the consortium do that can't be done by individual studies, or that could be done by individual researchers talking to a few studies, which some of these applications are much more along those lines. They don't need a consortium. You may well have gotten to think about, well, there are these 3 studies, I could just go and talk to those investigators and we can put in an application. So I wonder whether, if a group is to get together, it could think about what is it the consortium could achieve that wouldn't be achieved otherwise. And at the risk of putting out something like you to shoot something down, one possibility that I was thinking about, what would be of value for prospective cohorts across the world? So what would be something that would be global? What would be something that would empower these cohorts? That could be done in a relatively short period of time, even if it actually only empowered over time, would be some of the things that have been suggested by a number of people from low and middle income countries, which is around sequence sets that are representative of lots of different populations that would allow imputation. I take the point as an epidemiologist that it's genetics, but as John Dinesh, who's not here, would say, without genetics, epidemiology would never get funded. So, we are grateful to you all. But I think that would be something that would address a problem that's getting a lot of publicity about the lack of diversity. That the rest of the world, 99% of the world is not UK, 96% of the world is not US, and yet we're not addressing that. And I think something that said we're going to sequence the world, and I put this up as an example of the kind of thing, but that would be one where I think it would require the consortium. It could use the power and the leverage of the consortium, because one of the things we found in UK Biobank is that when we were given an amount of money by the MRC and the UK government to genotype the whole cohort, and we said, this is how much money we have, we need 500,000 people genotyped. Remarkably, the people who could genotype, the companies, came in with exactly that price. And so I think if you were to say, we want 100,000 people sequenced across the world, and the cost is, I'm picking a number out of the air, $300. And that was from the consortium, from a consortium of funders. It would put a lot of pressure on the suppliers to do a deal. But I say, as an example of something only the consortium could do, and something that is seen as empowering all of the cohorts across the world, if not in the short term, in the medium term, something like that.
So would the idea, and I'll call you in just a second, would the idea then be to have a charter group that, because it seems like people are eager, and I would like to have a little more structure in terms of what it is we're doing. Would we ask that group then to propose a few of these ideas, or would we ask the group as a whole that the next RFI should be for things like this? Is that what you're saying?
I think that it would be useful to have a strategy for the consortium of what the consortium can do that can't be done by 2 or 3 of these studies getting together or an investigator putting in an application based on 2 or 3 studies. Something that only the consortium can do, only the consortium can leverage, would be attractive, and that has a global perspective. And I think also it would be attractive not only to charity and government funders, but possibly also to industry. And we do know that there are industries, both the sequencing suppliers and the pharmaceutical companies, that are starting to do this in some countries. So one would be kind of using that leverage to leverage more generally.
Great. So in thinking of a path forward then, could we have the charter group also encompass that question? Or do you think those are 2 separate things that we should have separate groups do? What do everybody else think? Maybe I'll call on you while people are thinking.
Sure. Well, partly it was, excuse me, Mary from Welcome. It was partly a response to what Rory has just said, and I'd like to really back that up as a fantastic idea. You might remember yesterday I talked about a common sequencing strategy, and I think that's the kind of thing, using the power of this consortium to leverage industry to push down the price, to increase the diversity of the populations that we have sampled, and also to get over some of the bottlenecks, like the fact that we don't have an India-specific chip, or the things we need to make to democratize sequencing. The second thing I wanted to say, excuse me, was around what you do in the next few weeks, knowing that the Heroes meeting is coming up. And my suggestion and urging would be that you focus rather on specific individual research projects, which these RFIs largely are, and which most of these could be funded through normal routes through funders, and instead focus on the vision of the cohort and of this consortium, and ask for sustainable funding for this consortium, which means setting a vision, which means setting a governance structure, and pitch that to Heroes. And then you can give examples of the great science that this consortium can do that individual studies can't do. And I would use the genetic sequencing strategy as a key thing that this consortium can deliver.
Great, and it would also, I think, be good to have ideas that are non-genetic, that are more on the epidemiologic point of view. Yes?
I think you want a charter group to go through and put to the general group for discussion things such as the idea that Rory put. I think it's a good idea, but it's not the only conceivable one. I think you want them to work through these very general areas that might be suitable and come back and discuss with everybody and try to get buy-in from everybody, because if that's great but nobody but you wants it, then it's great, but you should go and do it separately. And if that's what everybody really wants, and I don't see why there couldn't be 2 or 3 things that everybody really wants. But I don't think the group should decide what they are. I think the group needs to turn them into something that can be discussed and that makes sense and that is clearly reasonably inclusive of a lot of people. And then there can be other ones as well, and I think then you discuss them. And they're not in themselves funding bids, they're areas that we could work up as areas to work on collectively that fulfill being cohort, being widespread, being manageable and possible, being the only people who can do this, being, if possible, attractive to industry or whatever, but if not, I don't think it's the end of the world.
Other comments along those lines? Yes, and then how come?
I think it's important from an industry standpoint that they're involved in the discussion rather than sort of it being conceived and then brought to industry to,
Yes.
so to speak, to, we hope you'll want to fund this. Okay, thanks.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so the goal from the Group B discussions earlier was sort of more to think about a theme that would be uniquely done by this group, not focus on individual projects, but sort of, how can we use the funding to bring as many of the cohorts into those themes, which no one can deliver on except these groups. So I mean, I think that was sort of a key point, sort of around the priorities of moving forward. Not individual projects, but theme, and try to bring as many groups in and use the funding for that.
Okay, so if sounds like we've come to some level of consensus in terms of needing a charter, and we will send out a note to everyone and ask you to join or to volunteer to be part of the group that writes that. we're going to have to do a lot of things, I'm afraid, by email. Conference calls are very difficult when you know, half of the world is asleep when the other half is awake, and so we have to figure out some way of doing that without, as often happens, leaving out, you know, India to Japan, because the calls are happening in the middle of the night. So we'll try and figure out a best way of doing that. And we do need to move on to the team report outs, but Jeff has a comment. So.
Yes, I think you're here because the general, we found out about you somehow, but because we don't have something that is an atlas of all the cohorts in the world, we really are relying on word of mouth. And if you know of groups that should have been in the room but weren't, because our spirit is to be inclusive, it's really important that you connect us to them or let us know who they are so we can be as inclusive as possible.
Okay. Any last sort of general comments? If not, we thank John for all of the work you did and will do in this area. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.